Did you know that Lamborghini made tractors before they made cars? To this day, they still make tractors, as well as their high-end sports cars. And I think it's a darn shame that John Deere, the American agriculture powerhouse, hasn't followed suit. So guess what I'm going to be doing? But instead of just reskinning an Italian supercar, I'm going to build a completely new vehicle from the ground up. So what does this entail? Well, I'd best start by boiling down some key features I think would work for the John Deere. I was thinking of making this car open top, because how else am I supposed to get a farmer's tan? I've never made a convertible in this series, so this will be a new challenge for sure. Nextly, I gotta add some kind of front hump. You can see on any of the big tractors or the ride-on lawnmowers that there's an ever-present nose that sticks out. I'll have to see how I can mask this into the body somehow, making sure to not obscure the view of the driver. Unlike their Italian counterparts, American sports cars often have a nice long front, and I'm counting on this to give us room to play with when it comes to the front hump. And finally, I'll have to come up with a light rebranding, so John Deere lawyers don't come after me. So here's what I got so far. We're starting off without wheels, I'm afraid, but we'll get there in due time. I pieced together a rough blockout of the vehicle, and now I'm just figuring out the proportions of the cabin, as well as how much space I want for the wheels. And once I'm happy with the shape, I then go on to make a clean model as one big part. And since I've got the underlying shape already mapped out, it's not too hard to follow the path. The problem I'm solving here is trying to simplify the geometry so that it's one smooth surface. It's kind of like one big puzzle you have to figure out in order to distribute polygons evenly across the body. And with the remodeling out of the way, we can move aside the original sketch, and I can now flesh out some of the aesthetic details that sit within the predefined shape. But I'll be honest, I'm not really feeling this big beak that I strapped to the front. So I'm gonna workshop this into a more exciting shape. I initially tried experimenting with lifting up the sides so the hump in the hood feels more level with the rest of the car, which is sort of reminiscent of the obtuse mud flaps you see on the tractors, which need a lot of room to house the wheels. So I think I'll keep this part of the look, especially when it allows the car to ride lower to the ground, which is ideal for a sports car. But still, even with this more conservative looking hood, I just don't think it has much of a signature to it. And that's when I came up with this. Not only does this neutralize the obtuse nose I built, this crease here allows for the impression of a hump, but it doesn't obscure the driver's view. In fact, it allows for us to slope the front of the car down while maintaining the signature piece, taking some design cues from the Italian cars with tiny noses, but instilling the American spirit by keeping the grille nice and tall. And now to speed things up, let's straighten out the sides so that they lay flat on the 3D printer, as well as creating an outline for the doors. We'll also need a recessed surface to fit the windshield. And I can play around with the backboard behind the driver's head. Usually for the door handle, I scoop out a chunk on the side of the car. But when you're creating a new identity for each car, sometimes you have to rethink the small details. It also felt rather fancy to have the handles sit so high up. Like the car is so low to the ground that you can't have it anywhere else. This lip here is also such a small surface to place a feature inside of. It just feels so delicate. Just perfect. And speaking of doors, I initially had 3 designs I was torn between, starting with this floor-to-ceiling version. But I realized at some point that almost no car actually works like this. It seems plausible because so many cars darken the area below the door, so it can seem like there's no skirt underneath. But on every single car I checked, there was a skirt underneath the door. But do let me know if there's any exceptions you can think of. The other alternative was this door with the inverted hinge, but I settled on this door that is rounded outward on each side. I think it just looks more bubbly and fun this way. But CJ, where will they sit? And to that I answer, in the cockpit. So I dug out a space and I filled it with cushions. I trust that you can fill in the gaps with your imagination because it's all well and good sticking seatbelts and a headrest and a rear view mirror in here until you decide to print this thing at 1/64 scale and lose all detail in the process. But back to the features. I feel like we've got most of the body contouring out of the way. It's time to place the more delicate parts. Things like lights, exhaust, grille, but it's not as simple as just tacking them on. They have to be deliberate, even if they don't follow legal standards. I've experimented recently with this outline around certain features. I started doing this with the PS5 car when I added these colored rims outlining the lights and the windows, but you'll see later when I add them in. And since I'm done with the back, I'll move to the front. And if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that every car must have a face. And what is a sports car without bug eyes? And this largely concludes the detailing process. One thing crept up on me, however. You might be thinking to yourself, CJ, this car looks an awful lot like a shoe. So I did what any sane person would do, and I doubled down. I raised the tail of the car to hug my 300-inch Achilles, because what screams sports car more than a pair of sneakers? I know by now you are probably dying to see the wheels, but we need to make more room. So I extended the back end of the car because I realized that Italians had it right all along. And finally, I could design some bespoke hubcaps for actually the hubcaps were pretty generic. But the tires, I decided to tweak the area where the rubber meets the build plate, and I added these grooves reminiscent of tractor tires. I made 2 variations of this tire, and I went with the one on the left. And at this stage, I've colored the car, and I sent it off to the printer. But in the meantime, I ought to do that rebrand I mentioned at the start, because I don't want John Deere lawyers accusing me of imposing on their intellectual property or whatever. So I took a trip to Parody Land and landed on this. I used an off yellow to supplant the imagery of antlers because I was renaming this company to Stag. And why would your company have a first and last name? Then I layered in this formidable green behind the antlers, further committing to the notion of grass and fields, naming this car the Stag Blade. What were you expecting? But the time has come to inspect my print. Using 3 filaments and 2 color variations, I printed the world's very first John Deere Stag Blade, a sports car willing to go off-road and get a little dirty. What do you think? Did I spoil the broth? Let me know down below. And check out this other video where I made yet another masterpiece. And don't forget to subscribe.